All right, welcome to the Quick Media Come Follow Me series. We are studying today D&C sections 10 and 11. The overall theme here, what we want to look at is a question. And that question is, has the Lord intervened in your life with a plan B? Right? Is there a plan B for you? What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that we may not always follow the right plan. In fact, it's probably happened several times. Based on what we learn here with section 10 and 11, it looks like the Lord oftentimes prepares a plan B for us. Right? This is not just about the restoration. This is also about a plan B for Joseph Smith. And so we, as children of God, may also have a plan B, maybe a plan C and D in place for us. Something that is prepared for us when we make a mistake, and gives us the opportunity to continue to grow regardless of that mistake. That's what this is all about. Keep in mind, for example, or think about, have you ever gone off the rails a little bit, right? Just a little bit. You've let go of the iron rod a little bit on your way to the tree of life. You've gone out in and been hit by some of the fiery darts of the adversary. You've gone out into the mist a little bit, maybe too far. Maybe it was hard to work back to the iron rod, or maybe you're in the mist right now, right? There's confusion. There's you don't exactly know your way. The Lord already knows that we're all going to go through this. And likely there are plan Bs in place for us to move forward. What about your patriarchal blessing? Going through your patriarchal blessing, have you always followed that? Have you followed that plan that the Lord has? And if you've gone off of that plan to a different path at times, is there another way back for you? Of course there is, right? There's always new opportunity. We learn that. We learned that with Oliver, right? In sections 6 to 9 in the last episode. We learned that, okay, he didn't learn to translate, but he does have opportunities laid before him to move forward. There is still the loving embrace of the Savior at the end of the journey for him. And it's the same thing for all of us. It's the same thing for Joseph. It's the same thing for the plan of the last dispensation in rolling out with the primary tool, which is the Book of Mormon. The Lord knows that there are going to be issues, that we're going to make mistakes, and there are opportunities that are put out there for us in case we make those mistakes, when we make those mistakes. I think that's an important thing to understand. We talk more generally, right, in terms of the atonement, that we've made this mistake and that we can now move forward, but there might still be a loss there. I think that thinking of this in addition to the atonement, which is obviously first and foremost at the center of coming back from a mistake, but understanding that the Lord already has a new plan in place for you. And you know, this isn't doctrine necessarily, I don't know, but this is certainly what happens here with the lost 116 pages that we're going to cover here. Right? When Joseph loses the 116 pages, it's his fault, primarily. Right? He asked the wrong questions over and over again to the Lord. And he finally let him do what he wanted to do on his third attempt, right? And asking to let this manuscript go with Martin Harris. He made a huge mistake. Not only was it an issue for him in his own personal life and his own family's life, this was for our lives. This is for the whole restoration of the gospel. Imagine what would have been on Joseph's mind. What would have, the stress, the anxiety, right, of having made this mistake and everything that is counting on this. And he blew it, right? But the Lord had a plan B in place. In fact, we learn in the words of Mormon and in verse 4 that the Lord actually prefers plan B in this case. That's kind of heartening, you know, to see that. The Lord actually prefers plan B, which was replacing the lost manuscript with the small plates of Nephi, right? That Mormon had put in there also. So that makes us all feel, I think, like, okay, I've made a mistake. I've gone off the path here. But not only can I get back to the path, but there might be a great plan in place for me still. Regardless of my age, regardless of where I've been, right? Maybe the Lord has this plan B ready for me to move forward. I think that's what we can take out of sections 10 and 11 here and what we learn about these lost 116 pages. Now, before we get into those and we learn a little bit about this derailing here of Joseph and of the dispensation of the fullness of times with the Book of Mormon and its translation, let's talk just a few minutes here about some of those things within the lost 116 pages. I think that one thing I would highly recommend is that you go back a few episodes here and you pull up the episode where I interviewed Don Bradley on his book on the 116 pages. And I know I've brought that up several times, but here we are, the lost 116 pages. Listen to that interview. I think you'll really learn a lot about this. And read his book. Go get his book, The Lost 116 Pages, and read that. It's fascinating what he finds, right? It's not all assumptions and, well, speculation maybe. He's pulling on real historical documents and references and going through the script of the Book of Mormon to put together some pieces here that are really, really fascinating and fill in some of the gaps for us that we lose from the lost 116 pages. First of all, point number one is that it's likely not 116 pages that's lost when we think of the 116 pages that would be lost in the Book of Mormon in our print edition. It's more than likely closer to 200, even 300 pages. Why is that the case? It's because of Mormon's abridgment, right? Up until his son takes over Moroni, this is about half the time, right? It looks like we lose about half the manuscript, the total abridgment, half the total abridgment of Mormon. It's a huge amount of scripture that is lost. So we don't think of it that way because we don't identify it that way. We have First Nephi coming up to the book of Mosiah, and it's a much smaller portion because it's a different set of plates that covers the same period of time that the lost manuscript covered. But the lost manuscript was much more detailed, right? It had a lot more about events and wars and dissension and the temple and a lot of other things that we don't get in the small plates. And so there's ways of reconstructing that through historical documents, interviews, eyewitnesses, and the Book of Mormon itself, right? Even the description of the plates that we get. So few things that I think are well, at least very interesting before we get into the sections here. First, the lost manuscript evidently began with the book of Lehi. So it probably centered a lot more around Lehi and his life, his earlier visions and dreams, right, that are described and that we know he had, than it would be centered on Nephi, obviously, right? So it might have included things like his genealogy. It would have gone through probably Lehi's exact genealogy, where he goes back to, and maybe some important people, maybe some people that are mentioned in the Old Testament, right? It would have probably talked a lot more about his departure out of Jerusalem and his preaching in Jerusalem. And then would have maybe even gone through some things where Nephi is splitting off from Laman and Lemuel, the 7 tribes that are built, that are divided at the time of Lehi's blessing in the Promised Land. It would have gone over a lot more about their time in the wilderness, in the desert, and going through the Arabian Peninsula. And it would have gone more over the priesthood, probably, right? An understanding of the priesthood and its ordination and its administration and its difference from the Aaronic priesthood, which would have been what was in Jerusalem at the time. And it would have gone over, perhaps, it looks like, because of historical documents, it would have gone over even the visits of Nephi and his brethren going back to Jerusalem from the Valley of Lemuel, when they get the brass plates and when they get Ishmael, right? And a little bit more about Ishmael's family. So, for example, the lost manuscript probably would have described a lot more about how, going through that genealogy of Lehi, how they were descendants of Joseph of Egypt, right? This is a very, very Josephite book, the Book of Mormon. It is the stick of Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, right? It is also, when we look through this and understand a little bit more about this, the descendancy of not only Lehi, but probably of Laban and Zoram, that this is a very Ephraimite book, not just Manasseh. We look at this primarily of Manasseh because Lehi's from Manasseh, but apparently, right, looking at the descendancy here, not just of Lehi, but of of Laban. Laban apparently was a descendant of Ephraim, a descendant of Joshua, who was an Ephraimite. The same Joshua that came out of Egypt with Moses and brought the children of Israel into Canaan, right, and conquered the promised land. And he would have had a sword that he used in conquering the promised land. That sword apparently was Joseph of Egypt's sword that was handed down through the descendants of Ephraim, who was the younger son of Joseph, but was the heir apparent. He had the birthright. And so that would have gone down to Joseph and then down to Laban. And Laban likely then would have been the oldest son. And he would have held on to the sword, which, again, apparently was Joseph of Egypt's sword, or was thought of that way, and of Joshua, the sword of Joshua. And he would have held on to the records that would not have been necessarily the same records that we see in the Old Testament. Why? Because the Old Testament is a Judahite record. Remember, the two kingdoms split off, and there was two different lines of records probably that were really kept at a high level, and that would be Judah, right, going down and coming into through the kings of David and Solomon, etc., all the way down to Zedekiah, and the prophets that would have written and collected records there with Judah, the tribe of Judah. And then you had a Josephite tradition and Josephite records. And so we think oftentimes of Zenos, right, where we get Jacob 5 and the parable of the olive vineyard, right, and Zenock and Nehem. These are some of the prophets that are mentioned in the Book of Mormon. And the first thought is, well, maybe they're just lost in the Old Testament. They were taken out. But that's not necessarily true. The Old Testament is a Judahite record, and the brass plates is a Josephite record, right? An Ephraimite record. The northern tribe was Joseph at the head, especially Ephraim, right? The kings of the northern tribes were Ephraimites. And so that would have come down, and who knows, it could have been that Laban would have been a direct descendant of kings. And that's why he's in a high position in Jerusalem. But that's why he would have the sword, and that's why he would have the brass plates, right? And so that's something we can look at where we understand the brass plates coming in with Lehi now. This is a Josephite thing. Now you're bringing together Ephraim and Manasseh here as Josephites, which also tells us that there were probably several people from the northern tribes in Jerusalem at the time that Lehi left, at the time of Jeremiah. So beyond that then, right, we also get Ishmael, who would apparently be, who the brothers went back also to go get, who also would be an Ephraimite. This is really important because if they're Ephraimites, if Ishmael's family are Ephraimites, then it makes it even clearer that this is the stick of Ephraim, right? Because it's coming down through, that would be back in the time of Ezekiel, who writes about this, right? About the stick of Judah and the stick of Ephraim, or the stick of Joseph. That's who would have been the record keepers, the two traditions, Judah and Ephraim. And so the Book of Mormon in many ways is about still the book, the tradition coming down through Ephraim, but now put in charge by Manasseh. And the descendants then of the Lehites, where the daughters of Ephraim marry the sons of Lehi. The daughters of Ishmael marry the sons of Lehi. And the sons of Ishmael, who are already married, right, are Ephraimites then. Then the Lehites as a whole are this strong mixture. And Zoram apparently is an Ephraimite. So you have, it looks like everybody accounted for is either an Ephraimite or a Manassehite. They're Josephites. And so there's this hugely strong connection with Joseph of Egypt, which explains why, for example, in Nephi's vision, as he's getting the interpretation of his father's dream, right, that they start talking about Joseph so much, Joseph of Egypt. We get more information about Joseph of Egypt and how someone named Joseph in the last days will play an integral part in the last dispensation, right? Joseph Smith, right? Because this is all about Joseph. It's all about the Josephites. And one last thing that I think is very interesting, especially for the beginning of the Book of Mormon, where most of us have read many times, is the time that Nephi and his brethren go back to Jerusalem and Nephi kills Laban. It appears that this was during the Passover Feast. Think about that for a minute. This makes a lot of sense, right? They go back to Jerusalem. The night that Nephi kills Laban, Laban is dressed in full regalia, right? He's got the robes, he's got his armor, he's got his sword. Why is he all dressed up, walking around in the streets, and why is he drunk? Well, apparently, again, based off of interviews during the time of the early times of the church and those who were around the church, there are records talking about the early part of the manuscript that's lost, where people said that it talked about many people being drunk in Jerusalem when Nephi and his brothers go back there. And that Nephi was around talking to many people, but he couldn't find out where Laban was because everybody's drunk, right? It's the last night, possibly, of the Passover Feast. And so this is the last hurrah, which also explains why Laban would be out with the elders that night. It's a holy week, right? And so this makes a lot of sense. We have a historical record that specifically says, from an interview, that Nephi went back to Jerusalem to get some records, and it was during a great feast. Right? Now think about Lehi's exile from Jerusalem, because they're going to kill him. Right? They're going to kill him. And if we start turning that into an exodus and a theme of an exodus, then this really starts to pull together for us, right? This is the time of the Passover. Passover is when the Jews are in Egypt and Moses has gone through all the plagues, right? All the curses, the 10 curses. And the last one is the Passover. And what happens with the Passover? That's why it's called Passover, right? Because you're going to put the blood of the lamb on the doorpost, and the spirit of death is going to pass over that home, and the eldest son will not die, right? But the eldest sons of the Egyptians all die, right? So again, what happens here during this time is that the children, the eldest sons of Egypt are going to die. Well, what happens with Laban? He's likely the eldest son. That's what that would represent. He's going to die, but it's going to pass over the other eldest sons, or Nephi. Basically, Nephi is preserved. Lehi is preserved. And they go escape Egypt, or escape now a wicked Jerusalem, and begin an exodus. If you look through chapters 1 through 5 of 1 Nephi, these all have an exodus theme. And in fact, in the original Book of Mormon, right, with the original chapters that Mormon gives us, or rather, let's see, that portion would be that Nephi gives us, right? That Nephi gives us in the small plates. Our chapters 1 through 5 are all one chapter. So if you read that and go through the summaries of chapters 1 through 5, you'll see coming together here how this pieces together as an exodus at the time of the Passover. So this would make an awful lot of sense. It also puts into context Lehi's statement while they're in the valley of Lemuel still. They haven't gone to the promised land yet, but he says how grateful he is that he has received a promised land. Right? This puts it right into context with the Passover Feast. Okay, so just a few fun things there about the last 116 pages. And again, go back to that video and read that book, and you're going to learn a lot more. It's important to do that because there's a lot of good scholarship that's put into that helps fill in some of the blanks for us and gives us a different idea about some of the scriptures that prophesy about the stick of Ephraim, right? And prophesy about the unfolding of the last days. A lot of Isaiah, right? Remember how interesting it is that the Lord says that he prefers the small plates. That's what he's going to say here, right? He prefers this. And what do we get here? Well, according to what Mormon says, Mormon likes it. He holds on to it because of the many prophecies about Christ. He sees it as very Christ-centered. And so that's what the Lord seems to want here. He wants this in place. The other abridgment maybe would have had a lot more details of a lot of other things. But look at the 1st and 2nd Nephi, what we get there. It is so centered on Christ. And it is so centered on Isaiah. Right? It's so centered on Isaiah. And we see this at the beginning of a new dispensation here with Joseph Smith and the early sections of the Doctrine and Covenants, where over and over again we get the phrase of a great and marvelous work. Right? It's Isaiah that's in there. So plan B here for Joseph and for the Lord and for us in the dispensation, even though it's kind of like, God, I wish we had those 116 pages or 300 pages or whatever they were, of course. But if it was one or the other, apparently we got the right one, right? The right section of plates that the Lord really wanted us to have. And that, again, brings us now back to this idea about a plan B for the Lord in our lives. I think that's an important concept to grab onto here. Look at verse 3 here in section 10. It says, "Nevertheless, your gift is now restored." Okay, it's restored unto you again. Well, again, if we've pulled off from the path or we've made a big mistake, right, we can have the gifts restored to us. We can have everything restored to us. We can have the blessings of the temple restored to us. We can, if that's been removed, or we can have the blessing of the Spirit back in our lives. Or we can have the blessing of knowing that the atonement is in our lives and it was specifically made for you and for I, that sacrifice. We can have the blessing of understanding as Joseph would here. The Lord lets him down pretty nicely here. I mean, he's pretty mad, but he's pretty upset about it, as we've seen in earlier chapters and in Joseph Smith history. But he's given him a new plan. He's saying, look, let's keep going here. We can do this. Right? I've got a plan in place. My plans are never going to be frustrated. Man's plans will be frustrated, but my plans are not going to be frustrated. So if he's got a plan for you, it's not going to be frustrated even from your own mistakes if you turn back, humble yourself, get back into that fluid hierarchy, then there's a new plan in place for you. That's a pretty exciting thing to understand, I think. So his gift is restored to him here in verse 3. It says, "Therefore see that you are faithful and continue on unto the finishing of the remainder of the work of translation as you have begun." So those would be really good words for us to hear, not about translation, but about our life and about working for the Lord if we've gone off a little bit on a different path. We come back, right? "Therefore see that you are faithful and continue on with your life and with the work, my work that I have for you, with our plan," right? And just as you had maybe began with this, You went off the rails, but now let's move forward with this, with plan B. And he says something really interesting here. He says, do not run faster or labor more than you have strength. And strength and means provided to enable you to translate, but be diligent unto the end. We kind of get this tortoise and the hare thing. Why would he put that in here? Right? As he's talked about losing the manuscript and then having his gift restored. Then he goes right into, hey, don't run any faster or labor harder than you have strength or have the means to do. So I look at that and I think, well, maybe Joseph was trying to do too much too fast. I've got to please Martin Harris, right? He's going to help support us financially. I've got to move these things forward and get going. I've got this urgency. And the Lord's saying, look, work hard, but I'm in charge, right? I can be in charge, and don't run faster than you are able to do. And maybe, I mean, just think of the just awe-striking, right? To think of the mantle placed upon Joseph here. He's not even head of a church yet here, right? He may not even know at this point that he's going to be the head of a church. All he knows is that he's restoring the tool or translating the tool that is going to bring the lost tribes and the Jews back to Christ. That's really what he's doing at this point, right? And then in verses 5 and 6, we see that there is, as Lehi says in 2 Nephi 2, there's opposition in all things, in all of our lives. There's always opposition in all things. That's a good thing. What's not good is picking the opposition. But it's a good thing that there's opposition in all things. Here we read, pray always that you come off conqueror. Conqueror of what? Conqueror of those adversarial things. Yea, that you may conquer Satan, and that you may escape the hands of the servants of Satan that do uphold his work. Right? So there are plans that are laid against you. Just like the Lord has a plan for you and a plan B perhaps for you, Satan has a plan for you. And he's got people that are going to work on that against you, right? And so knowing that that's in place and knowing how to handle that is probably going to be pretty important. Understanding that there's always opposition. That's part of the plan. We accepted that. And what would the plan be of Satan then here? It'd be to destroy us. It would be to take our gift, right? Just as Joseph gets this restored here, the plan of Satan here was to take Joseph's gift. And to take away this manuscript. Joseph falls into the trap, but there's a new plan for him. And then he says something pretty interesting down here in verse 25. He says, yea, he saith unto them, this is those that are going to be adversarial to Joseph Smith, right? The people that are laying plans here to take the manuscript and change it and then say, hey, see, you came up with new words and this looks different, etc. But the Lord's got a plan B, right? But this is what he says about those individuals. He says, yea, he saith unto them, this is Satan talking to these people or whispering in their ear, deceive and lie in wait to catch, that ye may destroy. Behold, this is no harm. And thus he flattereth them and telleth them that it is no sin to lie, that they may catch a man in a lie, that they may destroy him. Again, this goes back to the point that I've made often is, it's hard to find people that are motivated by evil, right? Even with evil people. Everybody wants to justify. Why do they, if they're not trying to justify, they don't care about morality. We might say someone doesn't care about morality, but that is really built into us, even when we want to make bad decisions. Remember King Noah and his priests when they're battling with Abinadi? Why are they battling? They're wicked. They know they're wicked. But they want to have the upper hand here. They want to say that they are the moral compass over Abinadi. It's very important to them, right? And anybody would be that way. Anybody who is evil is going to try and explain themselves and justify what they are doing. Justify it morally, right? That's how it works. There are very, very few people, I think, that are beyond that. Even when they are horrible, horrible people, They're going to try and justify what they are doing. And that's what we see here, right? It's like, look, deceive and lie, because it's okay to try and catch this guy in his lie, right? You can deceive and lie in order to accomplish this. It's no sin if you're going to catch a man in his lie. And this is how he says that Satan is going to destroy many people. You start justifying what you're doing. And this is why it's so important to put our heart and our empathy in the right place, right? You can have, think about being in a position of the early Soviet Union, right? Or early Nazism. I mean, before it really became what it became, right? And you go back and you look at that, they had their own justifications. They had their reasons, right? They would throw out the propaganda for these things, and people began to put their empathy behind these reasons that seemed moral, right? And so the way we're going to be pulled to do the wrong thing is oftentimes through a misplaced empathy. And so it's really important for us to study it out in our minds, right? It's very important for us to try and reason and bring it to the Lord and reason with him. It may very well be that we see something and it's the wizard, right? The Wizard of Oz. Oh, this is the right thing. This is what's got the authority. This is what I should be following. But then in reality, behind the curtain, we can see what's really there. Right? And so it's important to really decide, where am I going to put my empathy? Where do I put my trust? So the Lord, in his plan B now for the last dispensation for the Book of Mormon for Joseph Smith, says the following to Joseph Smith: "Behold, I say unto you that you shall not translate again those words which have gone forth out of your hands. For behold, they shall not accomplish their evil designs in lying against those words." These are the people that have stolen the manuscript. "For behold, if you should bring forth the same words, they will say that you have lied and that you have pretended to translate, but that you have contradicted yourself." So the Lord, obviously, way back with Mormon, right, going back 1,400 years plus, knows that this is crucial, right? This could be, it looks to me like this is a game changer here, if we don't have the small plates of Nephi. And so he's obviously has inspired Mormon to include the small plates of Nephi with the gold plates all together here, right? Because he really didn't have to do that. He already made an abridgment of that period of time and about Lehi and Nephi, etc. But he's told that he's supposed to do this for a wise purpose. And so he does, and he includes that. So we see just how important, how crucial the records are. Look at Nephi and his brethren having to go back after they've already left, risking their lives to go back and get the brass plates. The records are everything. You've got to have the scriptures. And we think about, well, how did this happen with other scriptures in the past? Right? Did this happen where conspiring individuals came and tried to make some changes? And the trend in academia right now is to say, no, that's hardly ever happened, and there's not much change. And maybe that's true to some degree, but there's an awful lot of evidence that says that there was changes, right? From the Dead Sea Scrolls to looking at even simple translations of the Hebrew in the Old Testament and how they could pretty easily be manipulated, and perhaps were. So that's something we don't really know. Right, and that's one reason why the Book of Mormon is so crucial, because we get an explanation for our day and our time of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the fullness of the doctrine of Christ that is in there. And then look down at verse 35. It says, "Marvel not that I said unto you, here is wisdom, show it not unto the world." Right, this is all the people that would want to see the plates, right? But he's saying, don't show it. "For I said, show it not unto the world, that you may be preserved." Right? So there are so many reasons why, we say, well, why didn't he show it to everybody? All he had to do was show this out to everybody. and everything would have been fine, and then there would have been all these witnesses. Wouldn't that be easy? Right? Wouldn't that be easy? And we usually come up with a response for that of, well, then we wouldn't have to have as much faith. But that's not all there is to that story, right? Again, as we talk about the plates as being these objects out of maybe like an ark, they had to be veiled. They had to be protected. It protected Joseph Smith so that he could even get the work done. Think about all these people that would have seen him, and then in their minds, hey, I've seen it. I know it's there. We're going to get that. He probably would have never been able to hang on to those plates, right? Somebody or a group, a mob, would have probably ended up taking those from him, number one. And secondly, think about all the people that wanted a witness of this and wanted to see the gold plates, what that would have done to them so early on in this process, before the church was even founded. And what that would have done and how that would have condemned them if they would have fallen away, right? If they would have fallen away, and it's giving too much out at once. The Lord doesn't usually work in that way, and in trying not to condemn so many people, right? So they're veiled and they're protected. And then down here in verse 38, we see where the Lord prefers the small plates. Plan B ends up being better for Joseph. Plan B might be better for you. And now verily I say unto you that an account of those things that you have written, which have gone out of your hands, right? So the lost manuscript is engraven upon the plates of Nephi. This is a separation. When they talk about the plates of Nephi here, they're talking about what they lost, they call the plates of Lehi, right? So and we call it now, usually refer to it as the book of Lehi, is what is lost, right? So even though it covers, 450 years, all the way down to about 150 BC, to the time of King Mosiah, right? So the Lord prefers this. Plates of Nephi, yea, and you remember it was said in those writings that a more particular account was given of these things upon the plates of Nephi. And now because the account which is engraven upon the plates of Nephi that's the small plates, what we have today, is more particular concerning the things which, in my wisdom, I would bring to the knowledge of the people in this account, therefore you shall translate the engravings which are on the plates of Nephi, down even till you come to the reign of King Benjamin, or until you come to that which you have translated, which you have retained. Remember, the lost manuscript he had translated up until chapter 3 of the book of Mosiah. Our chapter 1 of book of Mosiah is really chapter 3, right? That's where it starts. We lose the first two chapters. We've lost the first two chapters of the book of Mosiah. And if you go back to the beginning of Mosiah, read our chapter 1 of Mosiah, how it starts off, it's kind of bizarre. You're obviously being dropped right down in the middle of something. It's out of context. So he's saying, look, here's plan B. Here's how you're going to do this. I have something for you, and we're going to make this work. So a few things we might look at then that are in the small plates that are so crucial that we may not have gotten in the book of Lehi, right, is perhaps Nephi's description of his interpretation and his vision. That's one thing that might be very different. Very, very focused on the doctrine of Christ, his vision that he gets from his angelic host, right? Secondly, is his writings about the doctrine of Christ going up through 2nd Nephi. How about all of Isaiah, right? We say, well, we've already got Isaiah. That's not the point. The point is understanding why they're built around Isaiah. We still aren't really in a position yet, mostly as members of the church, where we really understand how the Book of Mormon is built around Isaiah, right? So we're getting there. That's something that we would have possibly lost with Lehi. Maybe he doesn't refer to Isaiah nearly as much as Nephi does, right? So that's something that I think is still coming. And then going into the book of Jacob, what about Jacob 5? What about Zenos's allegory, right? Would we have had that? Probably not, right? Maybe that's gone then, and we don't get that. And all these other discussions that these things that if we look closely at them, we can think, well, plan B from the Lord was to make sure that we had these things. And then if we think that, if we understand that, then we can say, well, I better learn those things that are in those small plates. I better learn why Isaiah's in there the way it is. I better learn more about Nephi's vision. I better learn more about the allegory of Zenos in Jacob 5, right? I better learn more about Nephi's description of the doctrine of Christ. Because those are the jewels, I think, that the Lord has given us in Plan B that may not have been in Plan A. And then going down to 47 and 48, we learned that what is in the Book of Mormon is what was supposed to be there for us today. And what that means is that what the prophets wanted that wrote in the Book of Mormon for the Lamanites and those that would be for the Ephraimites or for the Gentiles that would be bringing the gospel to the world is found in the Book of Mormon that we have today. That's important to understand. Here's what it says in 48. Yea, and this was their faith, being the prophets of the Book of Mormon, that my gospel, remember gospel is God spell or good news. That's what that is. The good news of what? The good news of Jesus Christ and his sacrifice, the atonement. That my gospel which I gave unto them, that they might preach in their days, might come unto their brethren the Lamanites, and also all that had become Lamanites because of their dissensions. Ooh. Let me read that again. They might come unto their brethren the Lamanites, and also all that had become Lamanites because of their dissensions. So we get here nicely packed in here. If we look at gospel as the doctrine of Christ, that's primarily how we ought to look at that word. It's the doctrine of Christ. Okay, we have the idea of we use that term usually more broadly to bring in all the principles that are in there, and they all are, but of course they're all focused in on Christ, right? And that's what gospel really means. It's the good news of Jesus' sacrifice, right? But then it says here, it brings in the Lamanites into this. And also all that had become Lamanites because of their dissensions. Remember how I always talked about how the Amlicites, the Amalekites, the Amalekiahites, similar names, all of them. And then, of course, the Nehorites, we get that also. We get the Kingsmen. We get the Gadianton robbers, right? All the dissenters. The Gadianton robbers, not quite as much, and the Kingsmen were not fully Lamanites, but they were making alliances with the Lamanites. Who are the Lamanites then? Again, that's not a racial divide between the Lamanites and the Nephites. We think of it that way. Nephi was Laman's brother, right? It's not a racial divide. It's a theological divide. That's how we need to look at the Book of Mormon. Why do we have the Book of Mormon the way it is, the way it's written? It's because you have the Nephites that are hanging on for their lives with the doctrine of Christ. That's the gospel, right? And then you have the dissenters from the gospel. The dissenters of what? Of the doctrine of Christ. That's what it always comes down to. The dissenters are anti-Christ. In other words, they don't believe in the Son of God being the Messiah. The exact same state of things in Jerusalem when Lehi left. That's why they were going to kill him for preaching about the doctrine of Christ. Right? So all those that dissent become Lamanites. It's political. It's a political group. It's a theological group. And it's packed in here nicely in talking about the gospel, in talking about the doctrine of Christ here in verse 48. That's the divide. That's what we need to learn from the Book of Mormon. And then just a couple more quick things here in finishing off section 10. Verse 51, yea, that it might be free, this is talking about the promised land of the Lehites, yea, that it might be free unto all of whatsoever nation, kindred, tongue, or people they may be. Of course, we see that, right? We see the principles of the U.S. Constitution that are in these latter days. People would laugh about that. Come on. No, those principles are protected and prophesied about and prayed for by the prophets in the Book of Mormon, that this promised land would be free, a free area. Now, There's levels of that freedom from the northern tips of Canada down to the southern tips of Argentina, right? If we look at all of the Americas. But this is definitely a land that is protected from a lot of the very harsh ideologies that are found and have been found in other parts of the world, right? There is a layer of protection here among all of the Americas. Now, you might want to think, well, we want to be specific in some certain area. I'm not going to go there at this point. Maybe we're talking the U.S., maybe we're talking Northern America, Central America, maybe we're talking South America. I don't care. But the Americas as a whole are under a veil of protection and under a veil of freedom, right? That is not necessarily found around the world. And that, of course, the U.S. Constitution and a place where Joseph here, April 1829, has 1829 going back to 1776. It's not that long of a period of time, right? You're talking about 53 years, 53 years at that point. And how about the Constitution being ratified? What is that? 1787. I think it is 1787. My history is not perfect, but that's 49, 52 years. 52 years is all that's passed when Joseph is getting this revelation here. So all of that has a lot to do with providing environment for the church and a place where the church can grow and flourish. It is part of the promised land. And then in 57, I love this, right? 57, behold, I am Jesus Christ, the Son of God. He's going to declare who he is. It is the doctrine of Christ that is being laid down here that is always a part of describing the records, right? When we find this about the 116 pages in section 3, and we're talking about the records and being translated with Oliver and him trying to translate in section 6 to 9, you're going to see this, right? You're going to see this doctrine of Christ. He says the same thing back a couple sections. I am Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Right? Those who descended to the Lamanites, they didn't believe in me. That's what I think. That's how I see that, is what he's saying. Those who were in Jerusalem, where Lehi had to leave, they didn't believe in me. Right? I came unto my own, and mine own received me not. Well, this happens later on in the book, not in the Book of Mormon, but in Book of Mormon times, when Christ is born and preaches to the Jews in Jerusalem and in Judea. Right? He's not received. And those that are the Nephites that do hang on through all the pride cycles and don't dissent, right? That's what they believe, that the Jesus is the Son of God. And the dissenters are who do not accept that. They are those that are anti-Christ. And rephrasing that I came unto my own and my own received me not, he says, I am the light which shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehendeth it not. Right? So most is darkness around, and the darkness does not comprehend the light, does not comprehend the doctrine of Christ. It's hard to do. And then I love this down here, right? We get here in verse 68. It says, whosoever declareth more or less than this is as he's gone through the gospel and the doctrine of Christ, basically. The same is not of me, but is against me. Therefore, he is not of my church, right? Whosoever declareth more or less than this. This is the same type of statement we get in the book of Revelation, that a lot of Christianity says, hey, you can't have a Book of Mormon, right? Because there can't be any more than this. You can't add on to this. This is what he's talking about. He's talking about the gospel. And of course, the book of Revelation was probably not even written before the book of John. John writing both. John probably wrote the book of John actually probably decades after he wrote the book of Revelation. And so is the book of John okay to have? We think of the book of Revelation as the last book in the Bible, and therefore it's the last thing written. But of course, the Bible wasn't assembled for a century or more after we have all those books, right? So it's not a good argument to say, well, you can't have the Book of Mormon because you can't add on to this. The book of Revelation was one scroll or one manuscript. That's it. It's just sitting by itself. Don't add anything more onto this because this is the gospel. That's what they're saying. Don't change the gospel. We get the same thing in the book of Deuteronomy, right? That not to add any more than what you see here. Well, of course, that would say that the rest of the Bible is no good. So that's what's meant by that statement, right? Whosoever declareth more or less than this, being the doctrine of Christ and the principles of the gospel. And then in section 11, just a couple things here. First of all, again, the section starts off with a reference to Isaiah. Isaiah is the prophet of the latter days, right? It's one of the reasons why we find it throughout the Book of Mormon. A great and marvelous work is about to come forth among the children of men. Right? He's talking about the Book of Mormon, and he's talking about the fullness of the gospel. All of it coming out to mankind in the last days. In verse 3, behold, the field is white, all ready to harvest. There it is again. Therefore, whoso desireth to reap, let him thrust in his sickle with his might, and reap while the day lasts, that he may treasure up for his souls everlasting salvation in the kingdom of God. Now, we can look at this and we can refer back in other places. We go back to John 4 in the New Testament with the Savior, with Jesus at the well with the woman, the Samaritan woman. That's where he talks to his disciples about the field being white and sowing and reaping, right? And working in the work of the Lord. But notice how he's talking here. It seems in the scriptures we get a lot of this, right? He says, behold, the field is white, all ready to harvest. So whoso desires to reap, let him thrust in his sickle with his might and reap while the day lasts. Well, they can't do this yet. He's already been told that they haven't been given the authority and the gift, which will be the priesthood, to go out and do this. But that's how the Lord talks, right? He's on a different time frame, a different perspective than what we're at. This isn't even ready to happen yet. And that's kind of how we get, the talking of the last days and the apocalypse, so to speak, right? The second coming of the Savior. It's like it's happening right now. It's coming right now. Well, that's in the Lord's time. That's in the Lord's time. The early saints were thinking that the Lord was coming at any point, that the destruction from Rome may be the last days and the apocalypse. That would be in 70 A.D., right? A couple thousand years ago. But to the Lord, it is important to understand the urgency of what we're looking forward to with the King being ushered in the royal procession, being Jesus Christ in the second coming. And then in verse 10, we go back to gifts here again. All this discussion of gifts. I love it. At the opening of the new dispensation, which is like what? It's like Pentecost. You ever think about why do we get this example of Pentecost right in the first year, right? This would be just a couple months after the death of the Savior. Why do we have all these spiritual gifts, the talking in tongues and all this pouring out of the Spirit? Why is that given to us in the New Testament? It's because it's a new dispensation. And because the gifts of the Spirit are being, the heavens are being opened. Right? You'll see oftentimes in the paintings of Pentecost, the dove front and center, right? Or somewhere in the painting, because it's the Holy Ghost. And you have the gifts of the Spirit being poured out to the disciples, to the apostles. And that's because Christ is now dead. He's been resurrected. He's back in the heavens, and we need the heavens to be opened because he's not with them any longer. And it's the same thing here with Joseph Smith. As they're learning how to receive revelation, the heaven is being opened, and the gifts of the Spirit are being handed out. And we see this really happen, right, at the Kirtland Temple dedication. So this is a section 11 is about Hiram Smith, right? And he says, behold, thou hast a gift. This is Hiram. Or thou shalt have a gift if thou wilt desire of me in faith, just like he told Oliver. With an honest heart, there we have that again, believing in the power of Jesus Christ, or in my power which speaketh unto thee. Okay, so again, applying this to us, right? Putting us in their shoes. We all have a gift. We've all been given a gift that may have been removed if we've made a mistake or we've gone off the path. But there can be a plan B, right? There can be a plan B for all of us that the Lord may already have in place, knowing that we're not perfect, and that we could grab onto again and begin to move forward and have our gift restored, whatever that might be. It might be the gift of hope. It might be the gift of a surety, right, of being able to move forward and dropping resentment, right, or the loss of time, or whatever that is, and understanding, okay, this is the plan the Lord has me on, regardless of where I am in my life, regardless of my age, regardless of the mistakes that I've made in the past. The Lord has a plan for me, and I can receive all of his gifts, regardless of where I've been in the past, if I can move forward, right, with faith and a desire and an honest heart, believing in the power of Jesus Christ. I think that's the overarching message here that we should get from the lost manuscript and from Joseph having his gift restored. We can all have the same. I'll talk to you next time.